Have the mic back there.
Yeah, AJ, when I was really little, I used to have night terrors.
Yep.
And my son also, he used to have them really badly.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what's going on there?
Yeah, pretty much all night terrors that occur. There's two types of night terrors that occur. The one type is when the child is just about to go to sleep or just about to wake up. During that time is the time when you are coming back basically from wherever you are in the spirit world. Your soul and your spirit body is coming back. It traces back down the silver cord, which is the connection between your body and your soul, your spirit body and your soul and your physical body. And it traces it back and then it re-enters your physical body. Now, many children experience that as a feeling, and many of you probably can even remember that feeling sometimes during your childhood and even your adult life, right? Now, as that occurs, that is the most sensitive time for you to be aware of spirits and have a recollection of it. And because of that space, usually the leaving of the body time or the return of the body, that's usually the time that we see or are surrounded by spirits that we can see. And some of those spirits will obviously be the spirits and how they look will be very dependent upon the condition of my parents as to what I'm attracting. Does that make sense?
Yeah, my son, I could never cope with it. When he would have them, I would just, and my husband would have to get up.
Yep.
And he would just be saying, get them away from me, get them away from me.
Yep.
In absolute terror.
Yeah, yep. Now, he probably isn't experiencing those spirits on a permanent basis in the spirit world, in the sense that his condition would be brighter than their condition in the spirit world. But it's as he comes back to his body, these spirits are able to observe the process and observe the process of leaving. And that becomes very scary for a child unless it knows what is going on. We talked about fear a lot today in our channeling, and one of the things that the spirits who we talked to learnt about fear is that fear isn't real, actually. And this is something to explain to your children, that even though these spirits look ugly and look demonistic and like they can harm you, and many of them will project a feeling, anger or rage at you, they can't actually hurt you. And it's only your emotional belief that they can that causes your distress. Does that make sense? And if we can help our child through that emotional belief, which is actually you dealing with your emotional belief, right, then that can actually be released and he wouldn't have that fear about going to sleep or waking up. That's a different kind of experience than what one lady yesterday experienced, and that was during her sleep state, negative things that she remembered happening. That is things that are actually happening in the spirit world, and that is happening because of different emotions that we're holding on to at the time. So if you remember being raped, for example, in the spirit world, or you remember some negative events like that in the spirit world, that's because there are some emotions inside of you that have attracted that event in the spirit world that need to be addressed. And once you have the courage to address them and the willingness, all of those experiences will stop until you finish the dealing of those particular experiences. Yeah? If we go straight behind you to Anna. It's on still, I think.
Do you know what it is when you're falling asleep? Like sometimes...
Where you feel like you're falling.
Yeah.
Yep. That's the feeling of leaving your body. Right? So many of you have that, right? On an almost constant basis. Right? And you know how you wait with the start sometimes, you're also about falling asleep and you come away. That's the thing of coming back to your body in a shock because you're a bit afraid about the leaving process. Now, many of us are afraid about the leaving process because of the spirits that surround us at the time of leaving. So when I'm leaving at the moment, I can feel like hundreds and thousands of very nasty spirits around me just projecting rage at me. So it's a bit hard to go through that and leave and then return through that. And you have a feeling about that. Some of you wake up with dread. Yep. One of the reasons why is because of this. Right? It's because there's actually a group of spirits around you who you are afraid of dealing with, and you are afraid and you need to deal with that fear. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
Yeah, that's what those feelings are. If we go straight across.
AJ, my daughter started having night terrors when she was 4.
Yep.
And it was about half an hour after she went to sleep, but particularly on the days that she was overtired. And she wouldn't wake up. She was in a state where, we'd go into her and she didn't know we were there, and she would scream and yell, but her body would be thrusting. And
what happened when you were 4?
I don't remember.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things that would happen when she woke up the next morning... This is
Did you
obviously
feel
hitting
that
me
feeling that
somewhere.
you just had when I said what happened when you were 4?
The dread?
Yes. That's why you don't remember,
Yeah.
because you are afraid of what happened when you were 4 with spirits. But please continue.
Around her anus is always bruised.
Yes?
And so I would go into what's happening to her, and I couldn't help. It was my helplessness of not being able to help her and not knowing what was going on.
Yeah.
But obviously it's all mine, isn't it?
Well, it's not just yours. You've got to look at the fact that she's obviously attracting something. So if is her anus physically bruised, then I'd be looking at something happening in the physical, because a spirit wouldn't physically bruise somebody's anus. Does that make sense? So there's something going on in the physical that you need to address there. But you also need to look at at the things that happened when you were 4. Like, let yourself... The way to get into them is quite simple. When I said, what happened to you when you were 4, your instant response was terror, right? Now, the way to get into the emotion is quite simple. All you need to do is feel that terror. Feel the terror you feel about it. And as you feel the terror, an awareness will come to you of what went on for you. Does that make sense? Now, a lot of times our children's bodies reflect our soul condition as parents of what we're denying. So I've seen children, for example, who their mothers have said have bruised vaginas, for example, and nothing's happened to the child, but the mother has gone through abuse that she's never dealt with emotionally, and it's now coming out in the body of the child. I've seen children go into, like young children, go into big rashes all over their body, right? And a lot of the time it's the mother or father's fear type emotions and anger type emotions that the mother and father are not dealing with and are heavily suppressing. So don't discount the physical that might be occurring, but you need to have a strong look at, again, the law of attraction with regard to the child is always relating to the parent in some way. And that's why I asked you the question of what happened to you when you were 4. Usually things happen with children onset at certain ages because they onset at certain ages in our own childhood that we now have shut down. So I've seen children, for example, I've given this example before I think, where a male child has been fine with his mother up until he was 4 years of age, and then from then on he's screaming at his mother. Now, something happened in mum's life at 4 years of age for this child now to be feeling so much anger towards her from that time on. And often what happens in terms of soul psychology, if you like, often what happens is when our child reaches the age that we were affected by something in our own childhood that's not healed, our child will begin to exhibit the same kind of problems and conditions that we are actually denying within ourselves about that age. And all we need to do is do what you just started doing, and that is just go into that terror feeling and you'll start owning it and see the difference in your child. Now, if your child's having issues with going to sleep or staying asleep because of terror, then that is definitely the parent's issue. Does that make sense? Always.
It's not happening anymore to her? What
Yep.
does that mean?
Well, that's a good sign. That means you might have dealt with something about it, about the terror. But I suggest to you the fact that I just stated something about 4 years of age and you went into terror means there's more there to deal with.
I think the terror is that I don't know anything about it, and then that, it's fear of the fear.
Fear of the unknown.
Yeah.
Right? Fear of what actually happened. Yeah. Yep. To be frank, many of us have heavily denied our childhoods to such an extent that we can't even remember them. And there's got to be a very good emotional reason why you've done that, right? And what we will do in the end is we'll get to the point where we will remember most of our childhood quite clearly, and that is only by lifting the emotional veils off of each memory, because each memory has its own emotional attachment, and therefore as you release the emotional veil off the memory, so therefore the memory comes and appears back to you. Yep. I want to continue, I'm going to continue a little bit because there's more groundwork to be done here that may answer many of your questions. So let's continue with this discussion for a bit longer and then we can maybe ask some more questions. Now, in this, you can see this child is heavily influenced by the parent's emotional condition really at this point. And so therefore the child is actually, when it's being influenced by spirits, It's really the parent's emotional condition that either affords the protection or lack of such to the child, right? So if that's the case, this child can go in one of two ways. It can be influenced quite negatively by darker spirits who try to control it and attempt to control it, and the child goes through lots of fear-based type experiences. What do we do as parents generally under those conditions? Well, what most parents would do is they'd start trying to shut those experiences down, wouldn't they? Because those experiences seem very damaging to the child. As a parent, you feel quite powerless, feel quite distressed, and you don't know really what's happening. And so what you try to do is dampen down the child, nurse the child through the distress that it's feeling, and eventually the child learns to disconnect from the spirit influence. And many times, from the time they're 5, 6 years, 7 years of age, they've almost fully disconnected from spirit influence in the sense of not influence, but in the sense of overcloaking type influence or negative, very damaging, malevolent spirit influence. And that only reoccurs when their own soul condition starts generating its own law of attraction events and oftentimes re-attracts spirits. And so this is why many during their teenage years might have had experience when they were very much younger to do with spirits. And then during their teenage years, they might have taken up drinking or smoking pot or whatever. And before you know it, by the time they're 20, 25, they're starting to go into maybe schizophrenia or some kind of so-called illness like that. And the reason why that occurs is they had a period of time in their life in the beginning where they had a quiet, open spirit influence. They then shut it down during a period of life. But then in the process of alcohol or drugs or some other type of influence, that opens up again the connection process and opens up the potentiality for connection to spirits. And so then the spirits come in and influence the child, and before they know it, they're heavily influenced by the time they're in their 20s or 30s. And this is why a lot of schizophrenia seems to come around during that time period, and also why a lot of it seems to be manipulated by the fact that the person did take drugs or had a lot of alcohol and things like that. So what's going on for many is this cycle, if you like, through their life of being possessed, if you like, by spirits, by a spirit fully almost overcloaking the person and guiding the majority of their actions. And then the person becomes afraid of those actions or gets punished for those actions, or society looks down upon them for the actions, so the person distances themselves from the spirit. That causes a disconnection, and now the person seems to be normal again, seems to be okay again, and then later in their life a similar event occurs again oftentimes. And this is why when somebody is said to have schizophrenia, for example, that they also said to never be able to be fully cured. Right? And this is because there is this underlying condition that's going to reoccur through their entire life.